Here's my Instagram hype.
Nice.
Little Fuji's. I don't know about all y'all, but whenever I post something on Instagram, like I rarely pick a particular song that I'm like feeling. I mean, sometimes, right? But I generally pick like a keyword. It's just how I think. So I put in the word ready, and then Ready or Not by the Fugees came up, and it just seemed perfect.
Yeah, definitely.
You're welcome to follow me on Instagram. It's Countyist with a Y. So County IST on Instagram. That's me.
Yes, I do follow you.
I don't post as much as I used to, but the world's gotten busier. A 5 and 7 year old in my case, and then also, TikTok and the rest of them. So we have limited bandwidth on where we can spend and post these days.
Yeah.
Well, shall we?
Yeah, sure. I will go ahead and get started then. So, hello and welcome to Podcasting 201, our much anticipated sequel to the popular Podcasting 101 program from summer 2020. My name is Beth and I am a librarian with the Business Science and Periodicals Department at Central Library. My fellow librarian from Business Science and Periodicals, Kelly, will be taking care of your questions. And we would like to encourage all attendees to visit mpl.org/stay connected and follow MPL on social media to stay updated on all our programs and services. This program will be recorded and a link will be emailed to you after the presentation. A recording will also be available on MPL's page on YouTube. Attendees may ask questions during our presentation, so be sure to type the questions in the chat. I will now give the floor to Ryan.
Well, thank you so much, Beth and Kelly and Milwaukee Public Library. Pleasure to be here. It's been a minute since we did the 101, but glad to be back for 201. So today's itinerary is primarily a recap for those that didn't see the first part, and then we'll do some more hands-on podcasting 201 level activities as well. So we'll be able to get some hands-on tools, look at those for video and audio recording, as well as tactics, ideas, strategies, and doorways to success. So anyhow, thanks again. It's always a pleasure to support the county and the community. And this week happens to be Wisconsin Tech Month, as well as MKE Tech Week. And lo and behold, I just found out through social media, it's actually Widespread Panic Day as well. So I don't know if you're a fan of that band, but they got a proclamation from the mayor today. All right, so welcome to Podcasting 201. So I'm supposed to do that. There we go. Just to recap a little bit from what we talked about last time. So if you're interested in making a podcast, you have an idea, but you don't know where to start. Well, the first place that you need to start, or you should start, is look at your goals. Like, what are you trying to achieve? That is primarily where the success is either going to be written or unwritten. If you don't have a clear goal, there's no way that you're going to have a successful podcast. So the hard work, the 1%, inspiration, 99% perspiration certainly comes in there, but you need to have a solid goal and dedication when you think of your podcast. So if you love sports, or you love true crime, or pets, or your community, your church, your children, whatever it is, keep that goal in mind. Don't lose sight or eye on the prize. And then your second thought really should be, how are you going to position that? So that could be with brand, that could be with a name, that could be location, that could be something clever, it could be a panel, Q&A. All these things you don't need to think about right now, but you do need to be clear on your goal, and then you kind of work on how you position your podcast idea by doing research, as well as selecting a communication format that you're comfortable with. So when I talk about communication level, there's different levels of communication. And we're going to go through a whole bevy of different technological instruments that you can use for your podcast. First and foremost, just using your phone is perfectly acceptable. Is that going to get on the New York Times or the Apple 100 top podcast with using your phone with, just out the box audio quality or video quality if you want to do a video podcast? The answer is no. I'm just going to say it. But you do have the opportunity to learn as you go. And there's nothing wrong with starting with voice recording and then moving to video, or starting just simple on your own and then increasing production as you go. So as you can see here, there's high production, professional production, amateur production, and seating production. So basically from good to bad, or from good to great. And seating production would just be, something simple. Amateur would be something probably most of us are capable of if we really think about what we want to do. Professional really takes a lot of serious thought, planning, editing. We'll take a look at some of that today and how to do that, as well as high production, which is those professionally produced podcasts that we'll also take a look at. So I'm sorry, jump back there. So when you think about what you want to do, you're going to have to think about ways to get people interested in your podcast. So if you want to set something up ahead of time, it's really called pre-production, or basically research before your pre-production, is ask people what they want. Look at your goals. Okay, is this just for me, or is this to, build buzz around the Milwaukee Bucks fan base, or whatever your topic is, and then think about how you're going to produce it, and then how you're going to promote it. So I see some social icons here. You see them too. Those are really good places to post and promote. Those are kind of the big ones. Podcasting itself has a large variety of other promotional avenues or channels to push it on, but the big social channels certainly don't hurt to look at right away out of the box. So when you think about planning, and you think about your goals, and you think about how to get it out there, and you're feeling pretty confident, that's good. One of your goals may be to make money. If so, you really have to plan things out. So this is planned out in terms of quarterly focuses. So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. How are you going to focus on your podcast for the first 3 months? You're going to generate buzz. You're just going to look to a general audience. For maybe Q2, you're going to try things more inventive, maybe live broadcasting. For 3, maybe you've substantiated yourself in the market. So you're going to look on how to evolve that with marketing, PR relationships. So pinging a lot of people or tagging a lot of people. And then 4, bringing other people on, like panelist or influencer marketing. So this is just, not a set in stone strategy for a year-long communication plan. This is just an idea that if you have a goal, break down your success in phases. And a lot of times people like to quantify that by, time on the calendar, 12 weeks or 3 months, or, by quarters makes a lot of sense to people. When you bring your guests on, again, you want to be very authentic. Just the world has changed. We've seen that a lot with COVID, just in the way that we communicate, right? So back in the day, if somebody was to go on, a live feed, and they weren't in a studio, they would have a bookshelf behind them, or they would have things presented very, astute, or, they'd have the sport coat. I have one over here, but, I'd be wearing it and I'd be much more formal. And that type of communication has really gone out the window. Certainly some audiences expect that, more conservative or rural listenership might want something a little more buttoned up. But for a younger, more urban, more edgy audience, or basically the audience of tomorrow, so the Gen Zs, they're completely open with, just being informal. So it's okay to be informal, no matter your level of formality. Always be respectful as a host, and always be respectful as a guest. I have a host here, he's a pro, and then a guest, Pam Beasley from The Office. If she's a guest, be very respectful. One other thing, if you have your guests on, you're going to want to do research. So if it's a university professor, don't get their university wrong. If they're at Marquette and you keep citing UWM, faux pas, right? Even worse. So you need to be prepped to some degree. It's helpful if you can read somebody's book. If they're going to read a book, or you have a book club, it's helpful to read the book. Do you need to necessarily as the host? Not necessarily, but it certainly helps to do some research to know the cliff notes of who you're interviewing. It certainly goes down to time. You don't have to be an expert in somebody's field. That's why they are your guest. They are the expert, but you should do enough diligence to, understand their background, and also understand, kind of any conflicts or anything that may matter to them. Same goes for, let's say the CEO of a company, or COO or CMO or CFO, anybody from the C-suite, right? You'll want to do some diligence. How's the stock doing? How's your company doing? And if it's much smaller, a small business, just some great questions out the gate. How have you dealt with the change in the marketplace? How are you handling the worker shortage? Is the Great Recession or the Great Resignation a real thing, right? Like, so you'll want to stay topical and make sure that you're doing sort of background in terms of your podcast itself. So again, I know we went through this last time, but there's always a beginning and there's an end, right? So you got to do your research, figure out what you want to do, how to be respectful, who you want to talk to, what the goals are, what you're trying to get out of it. And then when it's time to record, which we'll talk more about here, you need to do the pre-production, which is of course your research, but you need to get everything set, right? Set the table. And then additionally, in production, you'll want to have good microphones. You'll want to have a quiet environment. You'll want to have extra batteries. You'll want to have a plan B. So I have never gone into an interview without sometimes like 3 things recording, but often 2, and never 1. Just having a single source of failure is not, it's, if Murphy's Law, right? If it can go wrong, maybe it will. So, I mean, even here, I have like 3 computers, right? Just in case something goes on. I have multiple phones. I'm not saying you need to be so short up, but you do need to be prepped that if the power goes out, you got extra batteries. Or if, you're recording, you have an extra SD card. So a lot of recording isn't just straight from your phone. A lot of times it's like a recorder, like a Zoom recorder, which are, something we can potentially talk about in the comments later. But you'll want to be shored up for production, that it goes well. And then for post-production, more or less, that's your editing. It's making sure that you're promoting things, that you're saying thank you to your guests, that you're asking for referrals, that you're asking for them to maybe pay it forward and, send a podcast your way. Because the way that podcasting works isn't just you podcast and then you're kind of on an ivory tower and, no one can climb up it or see you up there. That's not the goal. You're really coming down to the people. So you want to shake hands and kiss babies and meet people and go into shops and have them come out and, say hi to you. So it's a really different format than kind of the ivory tower of like ABC News, right? Like we all grew up with Brokaw or Peter Jennings or Katie Couric or somebody of that nature. They're basically, hiding behind this giant media conglomerate, literally like at Rockefeller Center or something, like in a tower. And podcasting is really different. Like you're out into the street, you're mixing it up. So you need the right recording software to be there, and you need the right attitude to stay there and make it successful. So if you're podcasting, think about it like this. If somebody asks you a comment or a question, no question left behind, no comment left behind. That's kind of a philosophy we have here at Mention Marketing with our social services, but I completely have that baked into any podcast I do, or when I give advice or train on podcasting. So you can get started pretty easily. There's really not that much to getting started with podcasting. There are some best practices about it, right? So make sure you have time for your guests, make sure that you put in the research, make sure that it's set up to be a success. Like if you need a presentation, make it ahead of time. Make sure that your equipment is locked and loaded, batteries set, that you're good. I'm very adamant on that. And then, think about anything that could be kind of a gotcha moment or a loophole, or maybe a guest would not want to answer a question. So anything that may be sensitive, you'll want to approach before the recording is on. Be like, hey, are you comfortable talking about that scandal at City Hall? I mean, they would probably know that if they're on your podcast and you're like a political gotcha show. But you're just going to want to ask. Like the goal isn't, the goal is to build community and build bridges and make people comfortable and kind of bring the person on the other end of the microphone out into the world. If your goal is to do TMZ, okay, more power to you, but that's not going to win you friends in podcasting or probably most media circles. Whereas if you're, gentle and helpful, you do your research and you're a guest that, or you're a host that the people come to respect, that reputation will permeate the market or the space that you're looking at. It doesn't even have to be something local. So we mentioned the Bucks and some local stuff. Well, if you pick a particular subject, I mean, it could be anything. It could be slingshots, right? You could talk about, all the slingshots and you get a global community about it in the world. Or, it could be anything. It could be weather or pets, but whatever your topic is, make sure that you're creating a open environment, not only for your guests, but for your audience, because your audience is basically one of your end users who you want to please. So sometimes in media, things are positioned like, okay, well, you're really just talking to an audience of one. And I mean, that could be the case, like if you have a specific target buyer in mind or something for your topic, but probably not. I mean, I would think about things in a much more communal fashion. I mean, one of the beauties of podcasting is that nobody owns it. It's your voice. So we're not tied to, Facebook or even Google for that matter, or Twitter or Apple or any one platform. It's your voice, it's your show, you can do what you want with it. But hopefully, one of your goals is to connect the world and make it a better place. So I behoove you to, extend an open palm to your audiences. And then just like some, housekeeping, right? Like if you're talking, you want to be enthusiastic or, open to questions. Like anybody could ask a question here, that's fine. You don't want, if you have a show at 10 a.m. every Friday morning or something, you better be sure that you're uploading that live at that time where your audience can download it. And especially if you're meeting people, right? Like sometimes you're taking your recording gear and you're going places. It could be a shop owner, it could be a professor, it could be a pastor, it could be somebody else in the community. So you want to be sure that you're respectful, and you want to be sure that you're on time, and you want to be sure that you're adhering to best practices. So kind of getting into more of the 201 stuff, that's kind of how to do it right. Like be a good person, be prepared, be ready to rock and roll, right? If I had a t-shirt, and that would be a successful podcast mission. But if you really, really want to get it out there well beyond just good vibes, you're going to have to learn how to promote it. So you can promote through RSS, or basically, a feed that goes online that any site can grab and pull in your podcast and promote it. Or you can use particular sites. So Apple Podcasting or podcast is without question the biggest one. I was just listening to a podcast before this session on Apple Podcast. That has the biggest weight. By far and away, there's Google Podcasts, there's an app, there's Apple Podcasts, there's an app, there's Stitcher, there's so many of them. That's the biggest one by far. So if you make it big on Apple Podcasts, that's good. If you want to submit something and have the most people reach it, that's good. Make sure that it goes out on Apple. So some of the other ones that we're looking here on the screen are Anchor FM, Buzzsprout. So these also, democratize your communication as well and send it out. Anchor's free. Buzzsprout is a little bit of a cost to it. You can see on some of the icons, maybe recognize like a Spotify, right? Or iHeartMedia. So it can send it out to the biggies that can reach a lot of people, and that's good. I implore you to, when you record a podcast, to sign up for an Anchor or sign up for a Buzzsprout, or learn how to submit things on a singular level to Apple Podcasts. But I wouldn't recommend that, because a site like Anchor, which is now owned by Spotify, you submit it there, it shoots out to Spotify instantly, and it's on Apple and Google and iHeart and all the other ones, SoundCloud, within a day or two. It does take some time, but the actual raw feed is certainly there on Anchor, and kind of does the job for you. So I would recommend it 10 out of 10 times to find the best podcast sharing promotion provider for you. So again, here's just a look at, some of the cost and some of the storage and some of the analytics. And then one of the last things that you'll see here after the host bandwidth storage analytics and where they share is monetization. And I don't believe that if you're starting a podcast, your goal should ever be to make money. What it can do is have a halo effect and help make you an expert or a thought leadership. It can help position you to be a panelist. Like let's say I do a podcast on LinkedIn every single day. Well, without question, somebody that wants information on LinkedIn, whether it's a local chamber or a Rotary or something a little edgier like, LinkedIn World in Chicago, not a thing. But if it was, right, like my podcast would promote me as a thought leader and help position me to get a paid speaking gig or get, dinner and a night at the Westin or whatever it is. So the goal shouldn't be that, but that's a much easier route to pursue than trying to like put in ads. Putting in ads doesn't make sense, absolutely. But does it make sense for someone starting their podcast? And my answer is no, don't do that. It's just going to alienate users. And some of these sites are like, oh, it's cool, just accept ads. It's not. It's so much better to click on a YouTube video and just get the YouTube video you were looking for than to sit through like 1, 2, or even 3 ads, almost like commercials, right? YouTube was free for many years. They hooked us. And now there's commercials. And they're hard to stomach now that we can pay a little bit and make some of them go away. So it does make sense to have a long-term goal to monetize your podcast if that is in fact a goal. Most podcasts are about learning and connecting. Again, I think I looked through the top 10 or the top 15 podcasts in Milwaukee, and they're either podcasts around sports or the city or faith. And I don't know that any of them have any direct revenue streams at this point. Some of our media companies like the Journal, Milwaukee Magazine, Milwaukee Records, some of these places, like they definitely have WMSC, Radio Milwaukee, they have podcasts, but like how they're really making their money is their core principal profit driver, which is like what they do, right? So if a chef is highly sought after, they're making money from being a chef or like doing guest chef stuff on the weekend, farm to table, working a seminar, whatever it is, working their job. And the podcast is kind of it's a nice to have, not a need to have. Now that can change. I have a friend that is from Milwaukee, actually, that years ago, he was on my podcast and he'd do the weather report. It was always kind of ridiculous. It was like, he's a comedian and he still is. And he went out to LA and kind of did the traditional stuff, had some success writing and TV shows and stuff. And then a friend of his who was a little more known as a comic started doing, wanted to do this podcast, and he had this format idea. So he invited my friend as a first guest, and it was such a success, like, blew the, to the moon, right? That they continued keeping each other in the podcast. It's called The Dollop. And it's funny. It's basically Dave and Gareth, these two guys, comedians from LA, that talk about a point in history, and Dave researches it thoroughly, so he knows all about it, something really random. And then Gareth just plays along as a comic. He's like, really? That happened? Da Vinci did what? And his responses and stuff, it's a little explicit at times, but it's very funny, and it's non-traditional. And basically that podcast has turned their careers from writers into podcasters that travel the world. So they're big in Australia, I kid you not. They're on the Apple list, and they'll come to Milwaukee sometimes, and they'll tour the country, and they'll sell out these places, and they do live podcasts. So that's a rare success story, but I share it because it's close to the vest, knowing that I grew up with Gareth, but also that sometimes podcasts can have unintended consequences that really can bring you up to the next level in ways that you would never think. So an example, kind of, different, but let's say you're really into cooking and you do a certain, you have a certain way with food, or you do something a little different than others, that could kind of catch on. I don't know how many listeners are TikTok users and fans, but there's so many themes. Like right now, that dance is like, and then everyone does the dance thing. Like, okay, great. But who thought of that? Or you could make a podcast about what's trending on TikTok, right? And that in itself gives you an opportunity to have sort of like built-in notoriety. So, if you get your goal and you position your podcast, and we didn't talk about budget yet. In fact, we'll talk about that in a second. But if you don't have a big budget, that's fine. Again, you can start a podcast with your phone, whether you have an Android or you have an iPhone, it doesn't matter. You can even maybe have a flip phone. Don't quote me on that. But as long as you have baseline status quo equipment, you should be successful. I would recommend investing in potentially a Zoom recorder. Unfortunately, I didn't bring one here today. I brought like 10 pieces of equipment, and that's one thing I forgot, but I often use that, and I can post a picture of that. I know that I cite it in this presentation. It's basically like a handheld recorder. You can plug microphones into it. I know when we did kind of a send-off live podcast with NPR with Bonnie North and Mitch Tyke when they were still here for Lake Effect. And there was a young intern walking around with a Zoom recorder, which is very high quality. And, that's something that's a step up from, say, a phone. With that, though, it's all about your microphone, and even more than the microphone, it's about your environment. So right now, we're in a controlled environment. If there was a lot of traffic going by, where, some of the staff was still walking around, or TV was on, you would hear that, and it would interrupt the flow. It would interrupt the audio. I don't know if you could hear that bus go by, probably not with these mics, but if that was too loud, that wouldn't be great. So you want to be sure that you have a good enough production or an environment that you feel safe and secure, that you can promote and discuss your topic in general, in a captivating way. So you'll want to have the equipment, and then again, it's about promoting it. So we'll get into equipment in a second, but what really is going to hook people is your idea. It's going to be different. You're going to know about it. You got to be excited about it. And if you do get a guest, you're going to want to see, you're going to want to hear, what would you like to listen to, right? Like, what would be a question that you want to ask a guest ahead of time? So you can make a list, or you can, just try to remember things, but it makes a lot of sense to kind of do a little diligence ahead of time. So if, say, For instance, there's some mover and shaker. Let's say somebody is, let's say you were doing like, it was called like moving and shaking MKE, right? And somebody, well, here's a good example. So right now the state fair has had leadership, strong female leadership for like 20 plus years, really, really successful leader. She's increased the fair's population, not only all the extra stuff that goes on at the state fairgrounds, but the state fair itself, which is like 15 days or so. Generally over 1 million people come from the state of Wisconsin primarily every year. And you look at where the state fair has gone, up and to the right. Not to, pick on Summerfest, but Summerfest format has gone down a little bit. It's a little too maybe, well, I don't, I'm going to save that for a podcast. But I would say that state fair leadership's done a good job. So you could interview somebody like that, and you'd want to know some of that stuff ahead of time.
Real fast. Oh, sorry, Ryan. We do have a question. How would you define a podcast?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. So the way that I would define it is compartmentalized recording that's owned by you and open for promotion to anyone. So that might not be the, set in stone definition, but basically it's a recording that you have and you're able to promote it anywhere. It's a funny thing, like podcasting, the way that it came around is just basically people started recording things, and then we had the World Wide Web and we had this opportunity to promote it. Podcasting started to gain notoriety, or people self-producing their shows and their series ahead of time, around the same time that the iPod came around. So we went from a Walkman world to basically 1,000 songs in your pocket. And along with that, people realized pretty quickly, like, hey, some of this stuff, I can make little videos or make little audios or make little radio shows. I can do the same thing. So the whole concept of 15 minutes of fame, or, getting on TV, right? Like that was like such a big thing. He's on TV, she's on TV, they are on TV. That mystique is gone. I was just listening to Chelsea Handler talk about that a little earlier on a podcast today. And more or less that is, that's a podcast, and it had as much to do with timing as technology as to why it was named that. I think it's a great name for what it is, but that's essentially what it is, a recording that you're able to post and promote that's owned by you. So I did see another question come in. Two sites that I cited earlier, basically Buzzsprout and Anchor are good places to start. There's probably 50 places like that, but think of them as like social hubs that can promote your recordings all at once. So you push the button once, and then your podcast goes to 50 places. It's on anchor.fm. It's also owned by Spotify. So if you just want to Google Anchor Spotify, that'll pop up. But that way it shoots to everybody, or all the biggies, instead of going on these sites individually. So when I started podcasting around in 2006, I had to individually submit all this stuff. It was such a pain. And I was actually podcasting in Argentina, so everything came up, en español. And so I had to do it in español y inglés también. So I had to do it in English and Spanish. And then when I got wise to that, I started publishing in Ireland and Australia and in England, because it was an English podcast mostly. And I did some interviews in Spanish as well, and I do speak Spanish, but nowadays you just push the button once and you're done. So if you're thinking of some ideas, right? Like you're like, okay, this is exciting. This is cool. He's saying all this stuff. What's an idea for my podcast? Well, I came up with, about 20, and I'll give you some examples off the cuff too. So, and then we'll get into equipment. So some podcast ideas that you can own would be, people or places. So let's say you want to do Wisconsin, that'd be good. Or one that I thought of that I don't have the time for, but you should do is like supper clubs of Wisconsin, or you could do like fish fries of Wisconsin or whatever. It doesn't have to be Wisconsin. It could be Milwaukee. It could be your county. It could be your neighborhood. The shops on my street. Like what's neat on Vliet, right? And you could just do a podcast series on Vliet. If that works out, pick a different street. It's a similar template to what John McGivern did on PBS and Around the Corner. He's taken that concept, left PBS, and he basically runs his own show. I think it's called Main Street, but I mean, it's essentially the same thing over and over. It's like go around to small businesses and community influencers, film it, and people like it. As long as you're an engaging host, like John McGivern is, he'll sell out, tickets at the Paps and stuff. He's a comedian. There may be a window for you to do it. Movies is super good. Before everybody got on, all the legions of people on this this session, we were talking about Dune. So famous Frank Herbert novel. It's been brought to the screen a couple times. TV series, movie. Well, they redid it. It's going to be on HBO for I think like a month or something, and then in the theaters. And how exciting! Like, I don't know, Dune. Is it as good as the books? Is it as good as the old movies? Is it as good as a conceptual idea? I don't know. Movies is a great idea, but TV it's kind of the golden age or the platinum age of television. I would say the golden age is like, what we all grew up with, but it's just amazing, how many shows there are now. Like one I'm watching, I think it could be Apple TV or maybe HBO. It's called Foundation. It's based on a famous sci-fi author, and just looks extraordinary. Well, you could talk about, sci-fi, you could talk about TV, you could talk about movies, you could talk about podcasting. What are the podcasts that you like today, and why? And then, kind of like a book review, you could give a couple ideas of what you're listening to. They could be local. They could be in your industry or area of expertise, or something completely wacky, something that you can't believe, like wildest electric vehicles found on Alibaba. Okay, and it could, I kind of like e-bikes a lot, so this one author, Mike Atoll, has a article that talks about that. But you could do something similar like that as a podcast, or pick your own wacky topic, right? It could be, it could be about fudge. Time specific, like lunchtime chat, nighttime sleep, meditation, Monday, whatever. That's my attempt at spelling public buses, but you could do, with local leaders or just influencers in the community. You could get on a bus and interview people with permission, be safe. You could jump on the hop and do it too. I think Jeff Sherman, formerly of On Milwaukee, does something like that. And I was like, dang, that's my idea, but he did it. You could do it too. New skills, journeys, different places, different stories about sponsors. So that one's interesting. So if this podcast was sponsored by Mountain Dew, maybe I talk about the effects of Mountain Dew, or the way, different dew drinkers, like, what do you do when you drink dew? And that's just kind of off the cuff, right? But it could be about Milwaukee Tool, how people use their tools. It could be, about Marcus theaters and different theater goers. And, Marcus would potentially pay you money for that if you were good at it. So that's, a little more advanced. That's a little more 201, but if you try something for 3 to 6 months, podcast, get the hang of the equipment, shoot for a bigger idea, pitch Marcus, pitch State Fair, pitch Summerfest, pitch anybody, that you think that you want to work with, that brings joy in your life and you think others will like too. Workouts is good. That one's tough because, everyone's got an app these days. I mean, there might be videos on YouTube that you like and stuff like that. You could do the same thing. You could focus on a section of the body, like arm strength. There is like Peloton subscriptions. People pay for this. You can give it for free, or you can actually set up payment too. So that's more of a 301 to set up like a recurring subscription, but they do have those services that are out there. In fact, look at like Buzzsprout for some inspiration there. Point of view, everyone has an opinion. Comedy, and everyone likes to laugh. Events are great. Any community would like to hear it. Like, let's say you did an arts podcast, you could potentially go to UPAF. You could potentially just go to a small theater. You could go to an actors guild or an artist guild. It's not always about the money too. It's about influence. Like if you become a critic, it's a big deal. Just to kind of, call out Milwaukee Magazine writer Ann Christensen. She writes for Food, Milwaukee Magazine, or has for many years. And she's a total influencer. Like if she comes into the restaurant, I don't know what she looks like, which is kind of something the food writers try to do, is sort of hide behind their menus. Or I know like Laureate Milwaukee, but they carry notoriety. Like they get invited to the cool parties, right? So if you do good and promote good work, people will look to reward you with maybe tickets to a game or tickets to an event or compensation in one way or another. You never know. So there's a lot of pets and sports and stuff like that, and everyone loves kitten videos and puppies, and you can't go wrong there. You just can't. So that's a good thing to think about. I can pass this along as well, but like if you do have your podcast and you think of some interviews, like some interview questions, like if you had $100, to spend on health tech and no red tape, how would you spend it? You could ask somebody that works at Aurora that's qualified, that is given the okay to speak in the podcast. A lot of times you want to ask people and they think they can speak, but you have to clear it with their boss. Like for me, I run a boutique marketing agency downtown Milwaukee. I can pretty much go on a podcast if I want. If one of my employees does, I'd like to at least know about it. I'm a cool boss, so I'd be like, yeah, no problem. Like 9 out of 10 times. But some of the corporations are a little more buttoned up and really protect their brand, and rightly so, especially if they're publicly traded. So at that, I think there's actual designation with the publicly traded companies. So if you went to like Rockwell or Johnson Controls, when I worked at those places, you would need to have sort of like a designation to be an external communicator. I sort of had one because I ran social media at both those places, but to talk on behalf of the company, because there's like shareholders value included, and it's public. It's a little beyond me. Anyway, get permission. Like a doctor or dentist, get permission. So some other good questions. What's the most important thing you've learned in your life? What was life like before you learned it? Like, how did you get here? There's a meme going around big time during the pandemic, which was like how it started, like how it is, and there's different variations, like where it started, where I am now. Those are really good questions. That'd be a great podcast, by the way. So just a couple other questions. We don't have to run through all these, but like what's the best compliment you've ever received? Someone will go, well, this one time I was at a wedding and I was, giving the speech and everyone patted me on the back. And so people like to share, that was hypothetical, by the way, though I have been complimented for my wedding speeches, but it's good to ask people questions that aren't so much gotcha questions, but they're thought provoking. And if you can think of those ahead of time, that will add up to a smarter interview and make it more listenable and more enjoyable. And that could be a political candidate. It could be a professional. It could be a student. It could be anybody, but as long as you pose thoughtful questions, what 3 to 10 albums would you bring on a desert island? Or what would you pick for your last meal? Would it be pizza or sushi? Or, people like questions like that. So just give thoughtful questions and, consider putting yourself in other people's shoes. Just a couple more. If you could turn back time, talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him or her? Well, I'd just say who won all the sports games, and be kind, be true, invest in Tesla, I guess. So you can come up with some really cool questions yourself. So this here is a mobile setup from a real live podcaster that actually brought all this gear to his on the road. So a friend of mine runs a couple podcasts, the Pubcast. I used to work with him at Rockwell, Chris Luque. And then he also runs Manufacturing Happy Hour. Now, I don't know what the setup is for specifically, but this is the gear that he brought along. I would say this is way more than you need, but he is also, I've learned from him. So I've asked him questions about like, hey, what do I do with this? What do I do with that? And his setup actually looks very similar to mine in the Wauwatosa location that we have. I have like a big microphone and I have 3 monitors and it looks very similar. I am very surprised he brought all of this, including the monitor. I got to ask him about that. And you don't need all this, but he's very professional and he gets asked on speaking circuits all the time. He gets really good guests and he really promotes himself really well on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. He's there posting and promoting and reposting and re-promoting all the time. So you can't just post and ghost and call it a day. You really have to do your best in your pre-production, your production, and then post-production. And this setup looks very much like it's attuned to all that. Chris is very dialed in and recommend you listen to either Pubcast, which is about craft beer, or Manufacturing Happy Hour, which is mostly about manufacturing and a little bit about beer. So that's me. And I'm actually going to take, and I'm in this room right now, took this today. I'm going to take you around and show you some different gear that you can use. And after I take you around the room, I'm going to actually take you down on a journey. And I'm going to bring the computer with me. So if it's a little shaky, please excuse the dust. But I just wanted you to look at these different media options. So obviously we know a phone would work. This is similar to a phone or a big phone. It is actually an iPod or an iPad. So I have it connected to a keyboard, but you could use this for video production. It's really nice that it comes with the stand. Obviously the camera's on the side. So that's not completely ideal, but if you don't have a laptop, that works really well. If you have a laptop, it doesn't have to be a Mac or a PC or anything like that. You can absolutely use it. It's got, this one has a 720p camera, which is kind of so-so, and the audio is really so-so on that too. With this computer, which is a newer Mac Air, the microphone actually sounds really, really good. And the camera is a little bit better, but that's mostly due to software. So if you really want to up your game with your video, it makes a lot of sense to invest in a camera. Now this camera is not that fancy. It's about $30 off of Amazon, and this is 2.7K. So it's not 4K, but that's actually good. So it'll be about 4 times clearer than the MacBook Air, but it'll be a lot easier to edit than something that's 4K. And I'm kind of talking just, with a little bit of echo, it probably sounds fairly clear. But if you want extremely nice fidelity or great audio, you can actually plug in direct. So I highly recommend a USB connected audio device if you're going to be the host. Just make sure that your guest has the same audio video setup as you do. So if you sound way better than them, that won't sound good. I mean, if they're calling in on the phone, okay, but generally try to, in pre-production, set them up with something similar. So if you don't want to hassle with headphones or you just kind of want some ambient noise, this is a really nice, this is actually my first podcasting microphone. I think this is 15 years old and they still produce these. This is called the Snowball by Blue. Any reasons why you think it's called the Snowball? Yep, I know, it looks like one. But you plug it in, you can tell that it's on, and it has, I believe, 3 options, which is like direct, and then it kind of fans out from there. So you have 3 options. So you can pick up crowd noise behind you, or you could just pick up direct from the microphone. Blue makes probably 4 or 5 different versions of this. They're not all circles. I have another one that's very, very nice connected to my my setup at the other office. Now, when I'm out in the field, I really like to use these XLR type microphones because these can plug in directly into my Zoom. So you can talk, kind of very naturally, like let's say you're at the state fair or farmer's market. You can have it here on a desk, or you can connect this to basically a recorder. And something like this would be, about $30 for this and $5 for the stand. Whereas this is probably closer, maybe $50, and the nicer one's about $100. If there's a lot of crowd noise, this is a lapel microphone. You've probably seen these many, many times on talk shows like, Today or Good Morning America or any talk show. This one's maybe about $20. They're good, but at the same time, the wire can really pick up ambient noise as well as somebody's t-shirt. So if you don't want to mess with this scraping on the shirt all the time, you can also set up a shotgun mic. And a shotgun mic's really good if you're kind of shooting to a subject, and you can connect this into a higher end camera, which we'll look at in a second. Just quick, work with me. I'm going to show you what else you can do with the phone. So if you're interested in not investing too much into all that technology, you can actually just take something like this and, record yourself like this. Hi, welcome to my podcast. And you can do it with video, or if you want, you can do it with just audio, or you can have somebody else do it. So this is a nice piece of equipment which can hold a phone. You can see how it grabs it, and somebody else can film it for you if you want. Or if you're thinking to yourself, I don't really have anybody that can do that for me. Well, you can take something like this. This is called a gimbal, and it takes like the wobble out of stuff, which is hard to believe because it's wobbling here. But if we turn it on, we can see that it'll start to stabilize. Okay, like you can imagine the camera's at me. And this way I could walk around or, just look at something a little more visually stunning than having somebody else film what I'm doing. So a gimbal is really nice. That's probably about $100. I'd say DJI makes the best, and those are maybe about $120. If you want to take your camera or your phone and you want to put it somewhere, this is really cool because if you, like, let's say you want to put it in the rafters, you can take this thing and you could, hang it from ceiling, or you could potentially hang it on a chair, or, do other stuff with it. So these tripods are really useful as well if you don't want, like a gimbal extender, or kind of one of the more traditional ones that I showed you originally. And then if you really want to get into more like professional production, what we have here is a Lumix camera. It does film in 4K. You can see yourself here. You could have somebody else get behind it and look at you here. But you're going to have to edit it, and you can't directly kind of upload it to the cloud. So you're going to have an SD card, you're going to have a little bit of post-production, but at the end of it, you're going to have a very, very high quality picture that you can edit and share and post and promote. So those, in short, are basically the, some of the equipment. If you have any questions in terms of cost, or if you'd like to learn other ways to podcast, just let me know. I'm certainly here to help you. But as of right now, that's pretty much it for today's MPL production. And thanks for joining us today in Podcasting 201.
Excellent. Thank you so much.